impact. And now, we would also thank the speakers and panelists because they have been already answering questions posed to them as we speak. But we do have perhaps time for one question, and that is, 1 second, please. And that concerns ethics. This is for any or as many panelists as would like to respond to it. The question suggests that our actions are largely driven by economic considerations in the modern political economy. And the question is, how can we move to a world where our actions are driven by our conscience and not economics? Is that a false dichotomy? Because economics is expanding its views to better account for our world political economies and how they're degrading. So please, who would ever like to come forward and offer an answer to that, the floor is yours.
Yes, Bert.
Well, just very briefly, I suggest that only if we develop another notion of development and no longer suggest to people that, let's say, the American or high-income European lifestyle is what we should follow because that's really the good life. Unless we find this other pattern, this other image, this other view of development, we will not make that change. That's at least my view.
Yes, David.
I have already confessed to once upon a time being an economist for the Canadian government. And while studying and while practicing, it was resource economics I did, I realized that the underlying assumption of all economics is the notion of scarcity, allocation of scarce resources. Meanwhile, the truth of the matter is that it's a very abundant universe, overwhelmingly abundant. Already on this planet, if those of us that eat too much and waste all our food were a little more efficient in sharing, there would not be any hungry people. So somehow it's like keeping your eyes tightly closed and denying the existence of light. The assumption of scarcity is so embedded. It's not a tattoo, it's an implant in the hearts of economists. There needs to be a transformation of the sense of where are we, those underlying assumptions, and then start to live by them. Compassion and generosity would take care of a lot of the scarcity on the planet, and being much more mindful of how do we get our resources would help. So over the years, I shifted my sense of where the solution lies. It's not in the political, it's not entirely in the education, but it's partly an inner shift that needs to be shared among many, many people. And I think 45 years ago, when Limits to Growth was published, by the time the dust settled, thinking about this and working, and now it's millions. That's 1,000 times more. And if we do 1,000 times more in the next 45 years, if we have that long, that's humanity. That's billions. It's urgent, but it's possible. That's my comment. Thank you.
Yes, Pema, you can go next.
I'll be very brief. I think this is a central question, and I think we need to go back to some of the lectures earlier. I think Professor De Vries alluded to the philosophy of middle path, balancing the material needs with the spiritual needs. And I think therein lies the answer. And I think there are always instruments legal instruments, policy instrument, education. I think cultivating values is, I think, an important element that we should not miss, especially among our youth, among our children. The value system that is missing now, more and more exposure to the material needs, material gains, and so on. I think how we can do that, I think this is very important for future generations. Now, I totally agree that, the mountains will be there long, after us, but in what shape, in what form? Will they be white, snow-capped like this, or will they be just rocks, barren, which are not so pleasing? So this is entirely up to us. And I think tourism policy is also central. Now, there are ways and options now, like, we can still have income from tourism without destroying our mountains, without destroying our ecosystems. And I think there are various instruments that you can use, policy instruments, fiscal instruments, without losing the value. Perhaps we can reduce the numbers of mountaineers climbing up the peaks, number of tourists visiting a certain destination. I think we in Bhutan, of course, I'm sorry to mention, but we have a tourism policy called high value, low impact. High value, low impact. And I think that is, I must admit, is a more futuristic looking tourism policy. And also we have, without blowing my own trumpet, back in 2015, when I was the Minister for Environment and Agriculture Forest, I already tabled, Bhutan's declaration, commitment to remain carbon neutral for all times to come at the Copenhagen COP15. So I think we need to now change minds and hearts, and I think every one of us has an important role. And I would like to invite all of you to come and visit Isimod. We can work together. Thank you very much, Professor Anupam. Thank you, everyone.
Anybody else? Beth, you want to say something? Yes.
Well, interesting to hear about tourism, because I think at least I'm still engaging in education, because I think what is extremely important is that people, young people, start to broaden their, let's say, system boundary. So increasingly here, people in the Netherlands, for example, hear stories about what it means if you buy, like the average person here, 16 trousers per year, per person. What it means that if you become vegetarian and in fact start to import at a high scale palm oil, soybean, etc. So I think being confronted with this information in combination with the kind of things which David was mentioning, we will go in the proper direction, and then actions have to follow. And in my city, for example, you can see now that slowly the city becomes completely available for bicycles and more difficult for cars. Public transport is getting slowly support, helped by ICT, etc. But for example, tourism is an interesting quandary, because I know that as soon as the pandemic is over, what I hear all over the place is, we start traveling again. And then you hear as one of the arguments why they should travel is that then the poor people in the countries where they go to will get income. And what will they do with that income? Well, maybe buy, let's say, an iPhone. And here we are in a loop, which I think is extremely difficult. And only if we have some concerted effort in designing an idea of development, which includes the spiritual aspects, with maybe some of the high-tech aspects, a number of the community elements, maybe traditional knowledge. Only if we are able to go in that direction based on respect and dialogue, I think we can hope to make progress. And of course, nobody knows if it will be in time, in view of, let's say, the larger disasters or possible disasters.
Would anyone like to make the last comment? Yes, Dipak.
listening to everybody, what strikes me here is the need again to rethink what we mean by progress, what we mean by development. We have an system right now when two cars crash, the GDP goes up because the insurance is paid out and people buy new cars. If thieves have increased in society and people buy more locks and bigger and all these other things, security systems, the GDP goes up, and we call this a good thing. Okay, I mean there's something basically insane about it. Okay, now the solution to that is, yeah, the logic is all there. I mean, we all know about it, but nothing seems to move forward. Okay, we are locked in a kind of a very crazy system where people know that this is not correct, but then there's an inexorable logic of the model, shall we say, of development that has been adopted. Hence, I see that essentially, more social and environmental activism is going to be the only solution. There is no other way out.
Anyone else for a last word?
So maybe as we are talking about development, rethinking development, also as Anupam, you began, not only the Himalayan ecosystem, all ecosystems. So the challenge is that how do we really open ourselves to a kind of avoidable processes of learning, and that has become an issue, not only survival but thriving. In fact, our very life and death is at stake now, and as the coronavirus pandemic has brought to us to learn it with our bending needs. So therefore, open ourselves to different processes of existential learning. And this existential learning involves a kind of cross-civilizational dialogues. And as I mentioned, also we would have to rethink ethics in a foundational way, and bringing ethics and aesthetics together, and therefore ethics, aesthetics, spirituality, politics together in an interconnected way. And therefore the Himalaya becomes a way of truth realization, self-realization, and world realization, where the truth is not in a point, but at a landscape. And that landscape of realization is the calling of the time, and evolution is there in a way of development. But how do we engage evolution with flourishing? And it has some risks, but also bringing risk and wisdom together. Therefore, cultivate wisdom in our everyday life. And of course, as has been pointed out, the great significance of political elites and policymakers and the drivers who are working with very short-term focus. So how do we really engage ourselves with these kind of challenges? But as we do that, also not that we are helpless, because again, being with the Himalayas, these activists, like, G.D. Agrawal, he left his body, he sacrificed his body. But still we are not helpless, because it is the mountains who give us strength. It is the ecosystem which gives us nature, divine, and the human. So when the human is incorrigible, it is the nature and the divine who are also working with us.
Yes, Joe.
I'll put in my 2 cents. So I'm quite happy that I'm very happy that I'm working at the University of Sussex, and we're very happy that we've been 4 years in a row ranked as the #1 development studies university in the world. And it's where the famous Institute for Development Studies is, blah, blah, blah. And I'm very happy to lead the sustainability research program. Anyway, that's all in a matter of saying that we believe in an alternative development model. I think everyone on campus and all our friends, the leadership cannot come from us. It's got to come from the global south. And that's what I'm waiting for, and that's what we're waiting for. The leaders have to come from the global south. We're ready to support it with research, with scholarship, with engagement with local stakeholders, and we're engaged around the world. But the leadership has to come from the global south for this alternative development model.
Rajendra Bhai, you want to say something?
Yes. We can do the prayer today. The Himalaya call for rejuvenation, not for development. No need of the development, modern development today. No need of the greedy development for Himalaya. The Himalaya needed for the rejuvenation. The rejuvenation of the springs, rivers, and ridge of mountains. You know, that is called Sanatan Vikas. And you can use the word in English, sustainable. The Sanatan means Sadaiv Nitya Newtan Nirman, जो कभी नष्ट न होता हो. तो हिमालय को एक ऐसा रिजुविनेशन प्रोसेस चाहिए जिसमें कुछ नष्ट ना होता हो, और वही हिमालय की स्पिरिचुअलिटी है, वही हिमालय का रिलीजन है, वही हिमालय की कल्चर है. हम हिमालय की वॉइस को पहचान कर उसके सम्मान में जीना सीखें और हिमालय की डाइवर्सिटी को रेस्पेक्ट करके विनम्रता से उसके साथ बने रहना सीखें. ये यदि हम सीखेंगे तो हिमालय बचेगा, नहीं तो नहीं बचेगा.
The time has overshot, so it is my pleasure to do the task of thanking all who made this possible. Firstly, my gratitude to all of our speakers for celebrating the earth and its ecosystems together with us today. Mirian Villela, Joseph Alcamo, Dipak Gyawali, Bert de Vries, Anantagiri, Walter Immerzin, Pema Gyamatsho, David Berry, and Rajendra Singh. You have all made this day special for all of us. You evoked our conscience to fulfill our responsibility towards not just the Himalayan ecosystem, but all ecosystems. I'm deeply grateful to all of you for all you do to inspire us to keep our planet habitable and thriving. I cannot end this evening without thanking the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis, its Director General and CEO, Albert van Jaarsveld, and its staff, in particular Dennis Watsing, Juliette Martin, and David Soto for their excellent support. I cannot end the evening without thanking my dear friend and co-organizer of this event, Jan Sendzimir, for everything that has worked right in today's event. All the mistakes are purely mine, including the overshooting of time. My apologies. I am grateful to the many who I do not mention for want of time, and for all your support behind the scenes. Last and not the least, all of you in the audience for being patient and being here today, and for committing yourselves to your ethical responsibility to our ecosystems. Please do not forget to sign the petition to the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres. Please circulate the petition to your network and make sure that we spread the idea of having ethical responsibility to our ecosystems across the planet. Let that be our first act in response to our ethical responsibility towards our ecosystems today. Before I end, I want to mention that we will make the recording of this available to those of you who wish to have it. And with this, I wish you a very good day, a very good evening, and very good night. Thank you so much.
Thank you, dear friends. Anupam Bhai, but Rajendra Bhai, lovely to see you after many years.
You can end the recording, Jan. So.
Thank you.